You would think that such a tech-savvy generation would have a technological solution by now. It was this bill that allowed him to survive financially. It was his new leg that allowed him to survive the day-to-day. The first robbery took place here at the Sleep Inn, and it was an hour and a half later that police got a phone call from this hotel, the Hampton Inn, with a robbery of the same description. This is what the Provo Town Center looks like now, and this is what they want it to look like in the next 5 years. Oxycodone, hydrocodone, morphine, they seem like harmless painkillers, but they're ruining the lives of families all across the state. Steve is a hard worker, husband, and father, but it's been a long road to get where he is now.
Tons of time away from my family, but, years and years of not being present to actually have the memories I wish I had. There's a couple times I thought it was going to cost me my life.
Megan is a student and soon to be married.
It cost me a cousin. A boy I grew up with and played with every day.
It was just a few months ago that her cousin Colin Price died of an overdose. He was only 20 years old. Although Steve and Megan have very different stories, there is one common denominator: opioids.
I was taking, 30 Oxycontin a day when I did rapid detox in July of 2000.
The very pills prescribed to kill the pain cause the worst pain of all.
And one day, all of a sudden, you're like, holy hell, what am I doing? See, I'd already told myself that I'd be okay being a weekend dad. So I was choosing pills for my family.
Having to see his mother watch his body be taken out in a body bag and placed in the back of a truck.
But it's not just Utah battling this opioid crisis. Trump has declared it a national emergency. So what's being done? Here in Utah, many are working to curb the problem. For example, in September, the feds awarded Utah nearly $2 million to combat the crisis. Funds were distributed to these 11 different health centers across the state, including one here in Provo, Mountain Lands Community Health Center. Of those millions of dollars, Provo is only receiving $155,000. Yet recipients say only half of that money will actually be used for direct patient care, leaving them with a mere $80,000. Which begs the question, is that enough money? Todd Bailey, executive director of Mountain Lands Community Health Center, says no.
I don't believe it's adequate funding for the crisis that we see right now.
As the crisis continues to grow, healthcare management feels these critical programs remain underfunded. The lack of awareness and resources is worrisome to many people like Steve.
You don't know that there's an option. How are you ever going to get out? And then if there is an option, and they do offer programs, well, how are you going to pay for it if you're not blessed like I was?
Steve was one of the lucky ones, but for many, escaping addiction isn't a reality. For Steve, it took tons of money.
I was pushing $1 million.
Support.
And I had some pretty good parents.
And courage. The reality is that there are 6 Utahns just like Colin that lose the fight each week to this harrowing addiction.
God just didn't want his son to suffer, so he brought him home.
According to the Utah Department of Health, 6 Utahns die each week of an opioid overdose, and it only takes 1 week to get hooked.
A former Utah Highway Patrol officer has an accident on duty that changes his life forever. Shannon Grondel joins us now. Shannon, are these incidents common in law enforcement?
According to data gathered by the Department of Labor, law enforcement is among the most dangerous jobs in the U.S. But Scott Singleton surely turned his tragedy into triumph.
I was with the patrol for almost 24 years. He was probably the hardest worker of any trooper that I've ever worked with.
Scott Singleton had his dream career until one night he lost it all.
October 20th, 2011. It was about 1:30 in the morning. I was working a construction shift. I was moving through a closed lane of construction, and someone left the trailer in the middle of the road. The impact crushed my right leg.
He was in the ambulance, the car was crushed,
and I got in the ambulance and talked to him for a minute and made sure that he was alive. And
I was stuck with a very twisted and painful limb, and I could hardly walk across the parking lot.
None of us thought he was going to be out of work. We thought this leg's going to heal and he's going to come back, because Scott was one of the, even in 20+ years, he was probably the hardest working trooper I had at the time.
He looked at my films and he said, your best option is to have it amputated. I opted on April 7th of 2015 to have my leg amputated.
Can you walk without the thing?
I'd lost my career. I had to retire. I hadn't even planned on retiring. I had planned on working for many more years, and then you just lose your career and my ability to support a family.
I would appreciate any support and be open to any questions.
I serve in the state legislature and as a citizen legislature as well. And this happened right after I'd gotten elected. And one of the things I found out is that because of previous legislation, Scott was going to be ineligible to go to work in any other government entity when they forced him to retire because of this injury. So I went back in and researched the law and was able to run a piece of legislation to benefit not only him, but other officers who have reached more than 20 years, who get permanently disabled in the line of duty and can't go back to work in law enforcement.
According to FBI research, on average, more than 13,000 officers are injured on duty, and about 151 die each year. Scott survived the crash, and it was this bill that allowed him to survive financially. It was his new leg that allowed him to survive the day-to-day. But at some point, surviving just wasn't cutting it for Scott.
For my crash, he says, you'll never run again. I went in for my first prosthesis. The prosthetist, he asked me, what are your goals? And I come up with the dumbest goal I could possibly come up with, which was to run the Peach Days 10K. I tried to run, but it was very difficult. And started running, and I started running a little bit farther, and so then I got to the point where I ran a mile, and so I signed up for it, but I didn't want to tell anybody. So I didn't come in last. For the group of 50 to 55-year-old amputees wearing Batman t-shirts, I came in first. What's weird is not having the ability to run, you actually have a desire to.
And I'm grateful Scott didn't die. I'm grateful Scott survived, and yeah, he lost his leg, but you know what? Scott's still there, and he may be retired, but as far as I'm concerned, he's still a trooper.
Representative Perry tells me that Utah Highway Patrol has increased their efforts to keep troopers safe, including things like reflective vests, high-quality lights for their cars, and additional overtime funds. Back to you.